Good afternoon, and welcome to another Manhattan Institute Eventcast. I'm Charles Van Lehman, fellow at the Institute, and I'm delighted to be moderating today's panel, quote, Woke Schools, Responding to Critical Race Theory in Education. Critical race theory has been spreading in schools at an accelerating pace since last summer's protests. The ideology, which takes aim at colorblindness and treats all disparities as systemic, is taking hold especially in America's elite schools, where students are being instructed as early as kindergarten to become, quote, color conscious and, quote, activists for anti-racism. Consultancies are capitalizing on the increased demand for training in schools and charging a premium for their anti-racism curriculum. Many parents, presumably including some in today's audience, are surprised and stressed about what their children are being taught in school and want to push back against the school administrations, but do not know what to do. We've gathered a fantastic panel today to discuss the tools that parents can use to effectively organize and respond to this phenomenon. Before I introduce our panel, I'd like to remind everyone to please send us your questions through the comment function of whatever platform you're watching us on, and I will do my best to get as many as I can during the discussion. And now I'm excited to introduce our panel. Asra Nomani is Vice President of Strategy and Investigations at Parents Defending Education, where she is the editor of the Indoctrination Database and FOIA work. She's also co-founder of Coalition for TJ, a group of parents and community members in Virginia, a former reporter for the Wall Street Journal, a co-director of the Pearl Project, and co-founder of the Muslim Reform Movement. Nicole Neely is the founder and president of Parents Defending Education. She's also founder and president of Speech First, a national campus free speech organization, and has worked at the Independent Women's Forum and the Cato Institute. Yatin Chu is the co-founder and co-president of Place NYC, which stands for Parent Leaders for Accelerated Curriculum Education. She is also the New York City chapter co-chair of FAIR, Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism. An immigrant herself, she attended one of the New York City's public specialized high schools. Thank you all for joining us today. I want to start by talking to Nikki. You're in the process of putting together a nationwide network of parents who are concerned about wokeness, critical race theory, whatever you want to call it, in schools. How widespread do you think the problem is? What are parents on the ground seeing and telling you about?
Sure. I definitely think there's a misperception among a lot of people, conservatives, liberals, libertarians, that this is really just restricted to, it's a California problem, it's a Manhattan problem. It is not. It is everywhere. It is in private schools. It is in parochial schools. It is in red states. It is in blue states. And so this is really something that we've been almost overwhelmed by the response to us launching. We're getting about 100, 150 tips a week that we're trying to put up on our indoctrination map, just to show that this is a problem that's everywhere. And accordingly, people need to be vigilant about it. There's different terms that people hear about that have sounded benign. And now that they're learning a little bit more, they realize, oh, equity doesn't mean equality. Equity means something very different. Schools are stopping, they're not necessarily using the terms critical race theory anymore. They're talking about social economic learning. They're talking, or social emotional learning. They're talking about culturally responsive curriculum. Those are all just, they're fig leaves, but it's the same thing. And so I think once more people become aware, this is a massive problem.
Yatin, you told me that you were sort of first drawn into this issue by pushes to overhaul the specialized high schools in New York City. Can you talk a little bit about what happened there, what drew you in, and how you see it connected to sort of this bigger ideological problem?
Sure. I came to the United States when I was 8. So I took the specialized high school test 4 years after arriving at this country, got into Bronx Science, and the school frankly changed my life. So about 2 years ago, I heard that they wanted to replace the test to these schools to reflect the racial demographics of New York City. What this meant was reducing the current student population, specifically Asian students at these schools, in half. So I was enraged hearing about this outright racist policy. And as Nicole mentioned, what I've come to realize is that the word equity and this obsession with equity is not about equal opportunity, but more about equal outcomes. And that it's okay to institute racist policies such as these changes to admissions to get the outcomes they want to see.
Asra, I think you've been a journalist for decades, but it's my understanding that you were drawn into sort of a similar fight at Thomas Jefferson High School in the greater DC area. Can you talk about your experience, what first drew you in?
Yeah, absolutely. It was an email. It all began with an email on my birthday last year. It was from the principal at my son's high school, Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology. And what she wrote was that our parents and our students needed to check our quote privileges. And I just was blown away because I thought to myself, oh yeah, let me start talking to you about our privileges. We have Yu Yan, a mother who stood in Tiananmen Square to fight communist oppression in China. We have Nick, a family who comes from a family who fled communism in Eastern Europe, in Romania. And then I knew my own story. I came to this country at the age of 4. I was with my brother. My parents had arrived earlier because they couldn't afford to raise their children in America yet. They didn't know if they could handle the budget. We lived in a little ramshackle, our former World War II barracks. Nancy Drew was my best friend because I didn't know any English and learned English from her. And it was the public school system that allowed me at the age of 23 to become a reporter for the Wall Street Journal. It was in America that my family was able to realize the American dream through hard work and merit. And just as Yatin was talking about, it was such a devastation to me to see the stories of all of these families just erased as quote privilege because our children happened to do well on a test that allowed them to enter this high school. And so that's when I became an accidental activist, also speaking for the first time to my school board, and then turning my investigative reporting lens on our school system. And that's where I realized, just like you said, Charles, our school system, Fairfax County Public Schools, paid $20,000 to Ibram Kendi, one of the prophets of critical race theory, for 1 hour of an online session. That's when we learned this campaign to erase merit from our schools. And now many people might have seen that the state of Virginia has wanted to erase advanced math learning like they are trying to do in California. And that's how I ended up meeting Nikki. And we helped start this organization, Parents Defending Education, because we want everybody to feel empowered, like we've been fighting back in Fairfax County, Virginia. We want everybody to feel fully, realized as parents and as citizens in this country. And the work that Yatin is doing is real leadership work in our communities, and that's what I want everybody to know, that there's an army of mama bears and papa bears out there in America who are fighting this indoctrination, and we hope that you'll feel empowered by our efforts.
Yeah, so I mean, and it seems sort of like the common thread here is that there's a bigger picture tide of ideology, and a lot of it is very sort of anti-meritocratic in the name of racial justice, often pushing down on not just the privileged and powerful, but people who are able to get ahead because of the virtues of meritocracy on their own skill and grit. So I think a lot of the interest in this conversation today is not just what's going on, but how do we push back? I want to start with Nikki, just really in general. You're trying to connect parents, trying to get them to be able to work together. How do you advise parents to start thinking about organizing in their schools? What are the steps that you go for?
Sure. I mean, to me, I think about that line from G.I. Joe, knowing is half the battle. I would love people just first to know where the blinds are drawn, what their rights are. I mean, to me, one of the things that kind of flipped the switch for me was reading a Wall Street Journal article last year about a city near where I grew up outside Chicago called Evanston. And the superintendent said he was going to allow Black and brown children back before white children in the name of anti-racism. And I thought, that's unconstitutional. I mean, but also I'm married to a constitutional lawyer. And I was talking to some friends and they're like, most people don't know that's unconstitutional. And so I think it's really important for parents just to know what their rights are, what their kids' rights are. If you send your kid to a private school, it's a very different fight. You have signed a contract. You basically have no rights. That's maybe a contract remedy. Anyway, so just kind of just start there. But then, we offer all of these, this information. We have guides about different rights guides, the best reading out there. I think the first step is just to get smart on this. And then the next step is, I think, find other people. I mean, you cannot fight this fight alone. If you are trying to do this on your own, you are going to be ground down. They will single you out. They will terrorize you into submission. And that's why, I mean, I look at people like Asura and Yatin, who have found a coalition of people. And that, I think, has been a really smart tactic, right? They've been able to send out letters as the coalition for TJ. So it's not that there's any one person, going to school board meetings with a group of people. So you're not like the bad, evil racist. But, there's a group of people who are like, hey, you did a good job. And I think finding that coalition, that kind of that group of people to stand with is a huge step. We offer parents a lot of different guides of ways they can get engaged, because I think everybody can do something. Even if you don't have a kid in the school system. I mean, we have a tip line and people send us just, here's an article, here's a screenshot, here's something I saw. That's a really easy way for people to get involved. People can choose if they want to be anonymous. Almost everybody does. But we also have guides on simple things that I think, kind of the policy world takes for granted, like how to write a letter to the editor, how to write an op-ed, how to create a Facebook group, and things like that, just average people who have like a 9-to-5 job and they're still trying to virtually school their kids 13 months into a pandemic. People don't think about this stuff, and it's hard and it's a barrier to entry. And so we wanted just to make it very easy, because everybody has a different risk tolerance. A lot of people we hear from say, I don't want to lose my job. I don't want my kid to be penalized. And so everybody can do whatever makes them feel comfortable. And we want to make it as easy as possible, because we are all in this together.
Yatin, I want to drill down on something that Nikki said, which is, you've now organized 2 different parents groups, Place and also the New York City chapter of FAIR. Can you talk a little bit about what successes and challenges you've seen in trying to get parents organized? How can they do it better?
Yeah, sure. I think when the mayor-appointed School Diversity Advisory Group recommended to eliminate the Gifted and Talented program, we realized how difficult it would be to actually connect parents across New York City for something so massive. Being the largest school district with 1 million students, how are we going to mobilize? And we looked to social media. I mean, we knew parents in certain schools across New York, and by connecting on social media, we were able to at least find each other. And as Nicole and Asra know, that's really the first step, is to find parents with similar like-minded thinking around our schools and our academics and so forth, and get together. So, and from there you build, you talk to parents, you meet, you talk to elected officials, you talk to make connections with the school districts, Department of Education. Many of the parents that we connected with were already parent leaders in their own right. I think, they're parents that are really busy with, their full-time jobs, their home life, their kids. And, somehow there will be parents out of the masses that wants to step up and do a little bit more. And that's what we've been able to do at Place NYC.
Asra, I want to bring you in to sort of talk about a different tactic. You have, as I said, multiple decades of journalism experience. How are there? I'm a journalist too, at least with less experience. But how should parents be thinking about using journalism tools, FOIAs, reporting, talking to the local media? How can they become better citizen journalists?
Yeah, I mean, there's a power that comes with just asking questions. And that is something that these school boards and school districts aren't familiar with actually dealing with. And so you have to be prepared for their obfuscation, and their efforts to try to stymie you. What you can do is you can file questions with their public affairs offices. You can file questions with their public records offices. Just today, we called contract office at Fairfax County Public Schools because parents got a survey about anti-racism and anti-bias. It's basically an entry point for a contractor to come into Fairfax County Public Schools and change the curriculum. So when I got on the phone with the contract person, she told me that I had to file a Freedom of Information Act request for a contract that I was staring at that is on the portal for the Fairfax County government. And so they will try to do anything they can to avoid answering your questions, but you have the means, and all you have to do oftentimes is literally put into a search engine public records request and your school district and template, and you will get a copy of the request and a template of the request, who you send it to. But you can write to us also at defendinged.org, file an incident report, and we will help you. It's so important that we have transparency in this process. There was a mom yesterday who was just talking to me and saying, it feels like these public schools are now trying to act like private schools where they can keep all of these curriculum issues and budget issues a secret. But you are taxpayers and you have a right to know, and remember that power, because we can do it. And then what you have to do is fight this in the court of public opinion. So whether or not you do it by your own individual name or your organization and the coalition that you've created, create a Twitter account, create a Facebook page, create an account on medium.com, which is free, or Substack. There's so many free options out there. Get an account on patch.com and shout to the world your findings and share it with the local reporters, because ultimately this is the hottest story around right now and everybody cares about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and my experience is that there's just a lot of low-hanging fruit too. Just there are so many little stories out there that people are often intimidated by doing journalism because they think it's all been found before, and there's just so much out there that people don't know about. Right. I want to go back to Nikki to ask a little bit more about legal avenues, which can be sort of can be intimidating to an average parent. But it's something that Defending Ed is working on, and that I know FAIR is also thinking about. How do you think about sort of legal approaches to combating this stuff?
Sure. So we're structured as a membership association, which means that when we file lawsuits, it's parents defending education versus a school instead of being Charles and Asura versus a school. So that provides parents with a level of anonymity that is of paramount concern to a lot of people. Aside from that, I know, there are great lawyers out there that are willing to take kind of one-off cases if somebody wants to be a named plaintiff. One thing that we have found also as a membership association is that we're able to sidestep something called standing. And that's something that plagues I have come from a campus speech background where universities will just wait out a student. And I expect that K-12 schools will start to do that as well. All right, your kid's not enrolled anymore, you graduated, you went to a private school. The courts will say that the harm has gone away. It's moot, it's thrown out. As an association, as long as we always have a family who is enrolled in the school district, our harm is ongoing. And so, it doesn't matter if we have one family who's a second semester senior, as long as we have other families, our lawsuits can keep going. And so that's how we have approached it. I mean, and I think one thing that we're looking for is, where there is, an affirmative decision that has been made by a school district, it's not just one rogue teacher bringing in a book that wasn't approved as curriculum, but it is, a school board, like in Contra Costa, California, where they voted and said, like, we're going to allow these kids with this skin color to come back before these other ones. You are not allowed to do that. That is a constitutional violation. So we're looking for stuff like that. But I mean, I think there are so many lines that are being crossed repeatedly. I think about, First Amendment violations, compelled speech, forcing kids to acknowledge their privilege, talk about politics when they're not comfortable with that. We hear a lot about separating kids by gender and race and treating them differently, right? I mean, telling some kids that they have privilege, other kids that they're victims of systemic racism. I mean, what does that do to a child? Think about the emotional and the mental implications of that. I mean, kids' mental health is just at an all-time low right now after the pandemic and being stuck at home. And we are piling that on top of their plate, making children feel bad about their immutable, these characteristics that they can't do anything about. That's sick. I mean, that's disgusting. And so I think we have to start calling out these schools because they have been acting with impunity for so long. And once, there have been a couple lawsuits that have been filed. There's the one in Nevada filed against Democracy Prep, and that's great. But I think, more principals, more superintendents, more school boards need to know you make these choices, you take these actions, and there will be consequences. And I think, that's going to start to instill a lot of discipline in the system.
Yatin, I want to go to you and your fight against the changes to the specialist high schools in New York City. Obviously, that involves navigating one of the nation's most complicated and often intransigent bureaucracies, the New York City school system, New York City system in general. Do you have thoughts and advice for parents for dealing with local government at all of its sort of complicated levels?
Yeah, I think it's something. I was never interested in politics and local government, and you step into public education and you just can't dismiss how interconnected they are. The specialized high school, luckily, actually has a state law that says that, it's a law called Heck-Calandra law that puts in place the sole admissions test as the only means of getting into these schools. So what we do follow very closely is what's going on in state legislature. Now, there are a lot of programs that are not protected by state law, like the specialized high school, and that those are the gifted and talented programs, accelerated selective middle schools and high schools in New York City. Those are under the control of the mayor. We have mayoral control in New York City. And what we've seen this past year is, because of the pandemic and because of really parents not being able to organize this effectively, right, in person, there's been drastic changes made to our admissions process in New York City. They basically eliminated the admissions to gifted and talented program. This year, it's going to be a lottery. Same thing with some of the selective admissions to middle schools in New York City. Those have been turned into lottery this year. I would say the upside, if there is an upside for kind of, kids learning remote, is parents actually have access to what students are, learning in school, what teachers are teaching. And some of the things that we're seeing and hearing are just outrageous. A friend shared with me that his high school student in a AP calculus class is talking about how New York City subways are racist. And I said, how can that be? Well, they were talking about the fact that there are many more subway lines in wealthier white areas as opposed to, other parts of the city. So, they'll take up 23 minutes out of a 30-minute, calculus class talking about race and class. And what they don't get to learn is calculus. So, it's a little crazy. There are other instances that I'm happy to share if we have time, but that's just one that I heard of just last week.
Mm-hmm. I want to kick another question to Asra, and then we just have a ton of questions from the audience, so I might go to that early. Asra, I want to ask you a little bit more about your organizing with Coalition for TJ. You guys are also engaged in a lawsuit. Can you tell me about how that's going and where you've had success sort of in parallel in a similar situation in a different state?
Yeah, the strategy that we had is like many nonviolent movements where you want to educate people and then you want to expose what's happening and then also fight in the court of law. So I have here one of the masks that we created, We Heart Love TJ. And this was what we wore before we even went anywhere except in front of the school to challenge what was happening. Made some swag, TJ baseball hat, because it's about like Yatin and Nikki said, building your own community. And then when you go to court, then you actually have this community of people who are going to court together with you. And so what we did is we ended up filing a state case against the fact that they had eliminated the merit-based test to the school and brought in this new buzzword called holistic admissions. So we argued that they had violated mandates related to the gifted education being required to be tested into. And so the second level that we're now going to go to court later in May is in federal court. And so this organization called Pacific Legal Foundation has taken on our case, and much like the model of having representation for an organization, they are representing Coalition for TJ. And in that case, they're arguing, just like has happened in New York City, that the school officials and the state officials have put forward an admissions policy that violates equal protection under the law and ends up with a racial gerrymandering. An idea that we rejected many years ago because it was discriminatory against Black students. And now we should also reject it because this new critical race theory is a form of discrimination against folks based on race. It just happens to be a different race. And in most cases right now with the specialized schools, it's Asian students. And so what's happening is the court battle is happening as we fight in the court of public opinion. And one of these days we're going to have a significant victory. I just know it, because what is happening across America right now is not only immoral, but it's illegal. It is racism, it is discrimination, it is prejudice, it amounts to bullying and every other kind of oppressive act that we have long rejected as acceptable in society. And so for all of the people listening, I just want you to know that you're not crazy. You're actually have a very clear North Star about your values, and it really requires standing up with moral courage in each of our communities to challenge these authorities and these authoritarian laws that they're now trying to put in place, from the school board to the letters to the editor and then court of public opinion. So, and then finally the court of law, because we have to win. We have to really win in order to save America from this dangerous ideology.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I want to go to, we have a bunch of questions in the audience, so I'm just going to go from one of them, and this is for everybody. So, if you have thoughts, please sound off. Jean writes, I am a school board member in a rural Northern California town. I've tried to stay abreast of CRT. Any suggestions as to how to work within a school district? And I would sort of say, more generally, if you're on a school board, if you're thinking of running for a school board, do you have tips, thoughts for what you can do from that position?
Sure, I'm happy to speak to that.
Please.
We're actually right in the middle of our school board elections. So New York City has, we have 32 geographic districts, as well as special councils for, English language learners, special education, as well as high schools. And we are in our voting period where parents are paying attention to who they want to represent them on these school councils called CECs. So I would say parents pay attention to these activities, get engaged, understand where these parent candidates, where they sit in terms of their ideology, make sure that they reflect how you feel about what should happen in public schools. I think that's the first step is, a lot of these things are going on, whether it's your local PTA, SLT in New York, and CCs. I think there's similar structures, across the United States.
I will take that as Sorry,
Did I answer the question?
You did. No, you answered it perfectly. I was seeing the delay to see if Nikki and Asra had thoughts.
I have something else to add.
Please.
Something I think parents can think about, and we're launching our New York City chapter of FAIR in June, and one of the things that we will be arming our members with, parents with, is a project that gives parents the tools to demand transparency in what is being taught to our kids in their school. I think you start with your own school. I mean, you don't even have to go to the district level, really walking into that building, having the relationship with the teachers and the principals in the school. You need to be able to use that and have the courage and the tools to be able to say, look, and I need to know if something changes and something is being taught to my children, I should know about it. And I may have an opinion as to what I want you to do with that or not. So I think that's the first step.
Yeah, and I would just add that, there's a great model out there in school district after school district of success. We have just had headline news from Texas in Carroll Independent School District, where new school board members have been elected because parents were outraged. And I can tell you that we are hearing from parents from California to New York who are reimagining their lives right now and putting forward campaigns to run for their school board. And you can do this on your PTA also. These are all places where you have to now become a part of new policies and new solutions. So this is absolutely a time for everybody to stand up as active citizens in our democracy.
I think it's worth noting, too, there's a little bit of a market failure. I mean, there is really only one association that speaks to school board members, the National Association School Board, NASBA. And, they talk to 90,000 school board members across the country. And they are also pushing some of this stuff. And so there need to be other organizations that support and help school board members who maybe aren't bought into this, but don't know where to turn and don't have the resources. And so I think, that's something that I think is worth investigating as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me ask a different question from Edmund, and I might ask Nikki to go first because I know that Defending Ed has resources on this. How about parents demanding to opt out their children from anything radical they object to? What are ways? Is opt out an approach that's available? How should parents learn about it? When should they use it? What should they think about it?
Opt-outs totally fascinate me because I had our lawyers look into this, and it turns out that if states have opt-outs, then it definitely changes state by state depending on where you are. A lot of the opt-out provisions are very, very narrowly written, where you can only opt out about sexual curriculum usually, or AIDS. It's kind of like stuff tied from like the 90s. But it's not across the board. I mean, I can't say I don't want my kid to learn about, be taught critical race theory. I don't want my kid to, be indoctrinated with Marxism. You don't have a lot of that recourse, which is kind of interesting to me. And I think that is an opportunity for, state legislatures to step in and make it easier for people and make it a little bit wider. The counter to that is, well, that makes it really hard for schools and teachers. And then also, I've spoken to some parents that are like, well, if you do that, then your kid is like the isolated weird kid who sits in the back who has to read a different book. But I think, again, parents don't have the tools available to them. They don't know if the tools are available to them. And so I think if we put it out there, I think it will be taken up. And I would love to see, Yatin mentioned transparency before. I mean, I think a really robust transparency campaign partnered with a much stronger opt-out, provision would really make a lot of difference. I know the Goldwater Institute has been pushing state level curriculum transparency bills. I find it appalling that in states like Texas, they have something called a 3-click rule. For a public university, you can get from a university's homepage to a college class's syllabus within 3 clicks. You can get that for your college sophomore. You cannot get that for your kindergartner or first grade in the state of Texas. That's disgusting. These are the kinds of things. It's common sense. It's nonpartisan, and everybody should be on board with things like that.
Yeah, as an example, just a few weeks ago, we had another entry point that's used for bringing in critical race theory exploited at my son's high school. And it's this module that they call social emotional learning that Nikki had mentioned earlier. And so using social emotional learning as an entry point, they then attempted to indoctrinate students with concepts of critical race theory, including the idea that the mostly Asian students at our school were engaging in, quote, cultural appropriation if they did salsa dancing on International Night. So that's how outrageous this indoctrination is. Then they taught them, the buzzwords of critical race theory, like intersectionalism and subtle racism and implicit bias and all that. So it was only because parents pushed back that they then got an opt-out policy put in place for future learning like that. But this is not something that, as Nikki mentioned, folks are always going to be, that school districts are going to be easy about accommodating, but we do have rights that way, and we should exercise them.
Yeah, I want to sort of bring in maybe the thorniest question. Stephen asked, what can we do about these issues at a private school? Do we have any legal basis at a private school in Los Angeles? And my experience of talking to private school parents is, there are a lot. On the one hand, they're customers, but on the other hand, they don't have the same legal guarantees that the state has to serve, the city has to serve them. So, does any of you have advice for private school parents who might be listening in?
I would tell private school parents, yes. I mean, you don't have a lot of these remedies, like the First Amendment necessarily available to you. Although there are, possibly if your school took PPP money, that might be a maybe. All that being said, I think it all starts with look at your contract, see how your school contract is written. Does your school put out there, we value diversity and inclusion, and then they kind of have a lot of room to run with. But if your school says, we support free discourse and free, open inquiry, and then they're not delivering on that in practice, I mean, that could be a contract problem. Where private schools are particularly vulnerable is the court of public opinion, as Asra alluded to before, because these schools have to raise money, right? They get their money from tuition dollars, from application fees, and from alumni giving. And so when you start to show what is going on at some of these schools, it horrifies people. People say, you know what? I'm not going to fulfill my capital pledge I made this year. I am not going to give to, your annual fund campaign because I see how my money's being spent. We've seen this used very effectively at private schools like Harvard Westlake. There's that Instagram page, Woke at Harvard Westlake, that's been all over the news. That gets it out beyond just what's going on in the community to the wider world. And that has been, that has really hit the school where it hurts, which is their pocketbook. And so if fewer people are applying because they think, I don't really feel like sending my kid in $60,000 a year to that, that really scares them. And so that's something I think that private school parents really should start to do. Looking what happened with Dalton, at Brewerly, like all the stuff in Manhattan over the past few months, I'm sure those schools have been freaking out. And that's why we've seen a lot of these school administrators, quietly look for new opportunities because there is such a backlash.
And if you want, you can go to our resource page, and we've got a how-to guide on creating these Instagram pages. So if you haven't had an Instagram account, don't fear. Like, we've tried to lay it out for you. And again, like Nikki said, it's just about exposing these ideas, that are being put in front of your kids and to the light of day, and let people decide for themselves whether their schools have crossed a line, which most of them do cross that line. So expose it. And we're just taking a model, that was created by all of these activists that have tried to put pressure on our school systems to bring in these highly paid consultants. They basically tried to shame school systems into then agreeing to their diversity, equity, and inclusion policies. And so flip the narrative on them and show how their solutions are actually creating racism in the school.
I want to actually connect to something Nikki said about sort of the shifts that have been happening in the New York private school scene, and bring Barton to ask a little bit about that. But we lost Nikki? I'm not sure. Could you, Stan asks, could you please comment on recommendations related to K-9 and Penn schools vis-a-vis teachers objecting to the anti-racist ideology and not feeling intimidated to do it, speaking their objections? And I think that's probably in part an allusion to teachers like Grace Church School's Paul Rossi, who's now a FAIR affiliate, who have spoken out. So I think really in general, what is your read on that situation, Yasha? And sort of bigger picture question is, how should we be thinking about teachers who might have objections to the stuff they're struggling to speak out?
Yeah, as you've mentioned, and Nikki has mentioned, there's been a lot of media attention on the New York City private schools such as Barely and Grace Church. And I totally agree. I think one thing is to expose. There are brave parents and brave teachers that are now speaking out. Barton, who is the president of FAIR, Foundation Against Racism and Intolerance, was inspired to start this organization because of what he was seeing at the school his children were attending. And I think that's the number one step. And as Nikki said, it is about, where once people are aware, they can start being able to organize. And for private schools, you do have a choice. Some parents have decided to move out of the state even to find the appropriate education environment that they want for their children, to be not be targeted and shamed by who they are and what skin color they are. So those are the steps that I think parents are considering, and it will hurt these private schools. In my circles, which is primarily public school families, families are asking, can you tell me which schools are not woke? Can we create a little green book of schools that are not going hard at this type of teaching in the schools? So parents are now starting to crowdsource, even among public schools, which districts, which schools are staying away from this and which ones are doubling down.
I think that's a great point. If somebody wants to send their child to Social Justice Country Day, God bless, have at. But don't do it in the public schools to my child against my will with my tax dollars. And that, that's a big problem.
Yeah, we just can't we can't underestimate just how absurd it is for our tax dollars and our government to be in the business of shaming students. It's just unacceptable. Like, we decided a long time ago that the dunce cap was out. We were not going to put a dunce cap on the heads of any child. And these books, they're all like, I have my pile of books here, critical race theory, the Bible right here for them. This is one of my favorites, not my idea, that literally tells white kids that they are a bad deal. This is not okay. This is this book here. And I'm reading Lee Campbell in the chat. She says, my son hates it in his school. He's a white male and finds it puts him in a negative light. He finds it annoying and distracting. Like, no child should end up going to school where they're literally read this book that shows a devil with a contract that says that whiteness ends up giving you stolen land, stolen riches, and ultimately you sell your soul to the devil because of the color of your skin. Like, there's just something that is so immoral about this effort that, it cannot, I just can't emphasize enough how important it is for everybody to wake up every day and realize that you are on the correct side of morality and history when you fight this kind of indoctrination, because they are trying to destroy the entire spirit of a generation of adults that will, of young children that will become adults one day leading this country, and we can't let that happen.
Let me, and can everyone hear me okay? I think my audio has been a little fuzzy. Yes,
yeah, it's good now.
It's good now.
Sorry about that. So I want to bring in something connected to that. There's a question from Luke in the chat. My daughters have been given excerpts from Howard Zinn's book, A People's History, to read and discuss in class. Is this a starting point to open the door to critical race theory in elementary school? How do parents address the effect of Zinn's work in promoting anti-American sentiment? And I want to ask that question a little more broadly, which is what are red flags that parents should be looking for? I think some of what's happened is that because kids are in the living room, doing school in the living room, parents notice stuff a little more now than they might have 2 years ago. But even when kids are hopefully this fall back in regular school, what should parents be on the lookout for to be concerned about?
Yeah, I mean, there's an industry of curriculum that's now going into your kids' classrooms and into their syllabi for teachers. You're going to look out for this new buzzword that's called antiracism, anti-bias. Its nickname is ABAR or Arab, like depending on which way they flip the letters. They're calling critical race theory everything from culturally responsive teaching to culturally responsive education. They're using social emotional learning. The Southern Poverty Law Center is a big moneymaker in all of this, in the curriculum that they're putting. They used to call it teaching tolerance, and now they have a new buzzword of advancing justice. They're not even subtle about it anymore, and so you have to definitely look into the curriculum and then go to the organization that is actually the publisher or the producer of the curriculum and go to their website. As new citizen journalists, I would definitely recommend that you learn about a form that the IRS puts out called the 990. It is a form, it's a form that every nonprofit has to put out, right? We're arming them now, Charles, right?
That's exactly what I want.
We're arming them because every nonprofit has to put out a 990, and you will see that these are not just like mom and pop operations, the little like businesses. These are multi-million-dollar organizations where the top officials are getting six-figure salaries in order to create this indoctrination content that your kid is getting. So follow the money once you see who the publishing houses are, and really go into their resources, like go to their website. Because the one thing about all these organizations is they love to brag about how well they're doing. And so you will see on their Twitter feeds every school district that they're getting business. And that's how we can kind of connect the dots. And that's what we're planning to do with our work at defendinged.org, is we are put on this map, the incidents, and we're now chronicling all of the businesses that are putting this curriculum into your kids' classrooms. And so send us your tips for sure.
Yatin or Nikki, any thoughts on red flags for parents?
I mean, pay attention to what your child is presented with. I had a friend in a rather progressive district in New York City. He was horrified that his, I want to say first or second grader is being taught, it's a slide deck from Black Lives Matter. And this is a political organization that have infiltrated our curriculum and provided a slide deck to teachers to use with young children. This is just age inappropriate. It is certainly, against values that some families hold in terms of, some of the things that organization is putting forward. That's very much in the Marxist vein of looking at our world. So, I mean, he spoke up, but it was hard. I mean, aside from saying, don't teach this to my child, the principal and the district that he was in was not sympathetic. And for parents that happen to be in these districts, it is very difficult. You have a mob mentality of parents that support this. And I think it's important to find other groups of parents who will help you. And I think for parents who don't have the energy, who don't have the ability to risk their livelihood, it is, ultimately their decision to pull out of these systems and move elsewhere or go private. So these are definitely very serious issues that we're seeing. So pay attention. Definitely topics of essays. One of the things, when you're talking to your kid over at dinner, what's your assignment? Hey, what are you writing about? And see what the assignments are and whether those type of, homework and projects tend to now start creeping into a space that you're not comfortable with.
Yeah, they're even adding these essay questions to attendance surveys now in remote learning so that it becomes part of the requirement. And, Yatin mentioned the PowerPoint. Here's a coloring book. They're just getting more and more clever. This is going to little kindergartners. And this is part of the Black Lives Matter at Schools campaign. So what that one parent that Yatin that you were talking about, right there, they're downstream of this huge national campaign that is happening all in school districts around the country, coming up with products like this coloring book. They know that this is the problem, is that they have hijacked education now, the teachers colleges and these other places, so that they're churning out the curriculum in order to then indoctrinate.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is very much like, there are schools that put out statements after every major news incident now, right? Like the Chauvin verdict and the George Floyd shooting and the Asian, the massage thing in Atlanta a few weeks ago. And so they'll put out, here are resources, here are links, here are ideas. And to me, that's kind of like a where there's smoke, there's fire thing. Because okay, so if that's where you're coming from, then what else is going on? I mean, we're now starting to see, and we're getting tips from families about districts that are intentionally trying to hide things from parents, right? And there was a Twitter thread kind of famously out Pennsylvania last year where a teacher was complaining about virtual school going on because, that it's interfering with what we're trying to do and, the unprogramming kids from their family's values. I mean, this is the mindset where families are being pitted against their schools right now, which is really gross. And so if you feel that your school is starting to hide something from you, frankly, they probably are. And it's worth investigating. And it's worth, talking to us, talking to people like FAIR, and trying to figure out what is going on behind the curtain, because they know that when people find out, they're mad and they don't want to deal with that.
Yeah. Charles, you just had mentioned earlier, all the years that I've had in journalism, and I've covered terrorism, I've covered corporate scandal, political scandal. And this past year, reporting about the school systems, I have never witnessed up front so much political corruption. It's just stuns me. And every single day that we hear about how they are managing the information also, it's like when entire industries, like when Chernobyl happened, and then you have a public relations campaign of subterfuge and deception. There's so much deception happening. So I just again want to encourage everyone that if your spidey sense goes off, that something's off, it's correct. Like there is something very wrong happening within our school systems right now that is massive corruption. And we are basically the guardians of America's future because we are the ones that are going to be standing up to the corruption and exposing it and challenging it. And so you all are on point, when you ask these questions.
I want to, and we have only a few minutes left, but so I have just one or two more questions, but I want to come back to something Asra said, which is sort of the question about money. My reporting, Asra's reporting, other people's reporting, there's a lot of money that flows around, whether it's consultancies, whether it's prominent public speakers, it's Ibram Kendi, whoever, that's whether it's your tax dollars or your tuition dollars, these schools are spending large sums of money to sort of act to their values, live out their values, hire people to come talk to your kids, hire people to come change their curriculum, review their curriculum. And in my mind, that's a very effective tool. We can go blue in the face talking about principles of merit or free speech or compelled speech, trying to have philosophical arguments. But at the end of the day, wallet arguments are really persuasive. Do you, and I'm interested in basically everybody's thoughts on, what role that argument plays in sort of being persuasive for parents, and B, what role profit it plays in all of this, in the rapid spread of this stuff.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the contract that I saw our school district sign up today, that came across that, the school district then said that I had to file a Freedom of Information Act request. I mean, they literally have here counseling and coaching for individual teachers, and they're going to charge $12,000 per teacher that they're going to coach. They're going to charge $5,000 to run a focus group. These consultants get $15,000 to $20,000 for 1 hour of consulting. We got a Freedom of Information Act request from Texas and the Eaton School District, and a college professor at Columbia is getting $170,000 for a contract that he's doing part-time for a year. I think, Charles, just like you said, we can have a lot of nuanced debate about ideas, but the bottom line is when you have a misspending and you have even corruption in the contracts, for example, no bid contracts, doling out millions of dollars, then you have a scandal that every taxpayer should care about. And that's where I really find that the outrage is universal. People really do not get paid $200 for a minute of their work usually. And when they hear that somebody else gets paid that kind of money, they look at their own lives and say something's wrong.
Well, yeah. And I think different messages hit with different people, right? And so some people might really like the deep dive into the intellectual origins of critical race theory, but that district that Asa was talking about, the Ames School District outside Austin, they made the decision. They said, we don't have enough money to hire a crossing guard for our local elementary school. And then they went to the state legislature, pled pauper, and were kind of going, hands out, trying to get more money from the state for that. That's an affirmative decision that these schools are making. And let's bear in mind, this is a year when people have been pulling their kids out of private school or out of public school to homeschool, to private school, to pod. So districts have less money to work with, period. So you have less money. You've chosen to not spend it on things that are a priority for our district, things that we want, things that we need, things that we value. Instead, we're giving it to these consultants that really, we've seen lots and lots of equity contracts. Never do they come back with, you guys are good, no problems here, moving on. It's always, you have a problem and you must hire us in perpetuity to be a little less evil in the future. It's like the greatest scam of all time. But again, our kids are the ones who are losing out. Our kids are the ones who are not having access to, soccer equipment or whatever else a district might need because they've chosen to spend their money a different way.
Yeah, in New York City, we spend the most per student, almost double the national average. And yet our reading and math proficiency scores, only about half of our kids can read or do math at grade level. And you really wonder where this money goes. And, while, parents and activists have complained that we haven't been fully funded, this year, thanks to the federal government, we're going to be flushed with money flush with money for a system that has lost hundreds of thousands of kids out of our New York City schools. So if you thought the 30,000 plus per kid was an outrageous amount to spend per student, it's going to be even higher this year because we have fewer students in our system who knows where they went to. Some went to parochial, some went to private, some have left the state. But, you know, we're talking about probably about 200,000 kids who are no longer in our system. And we're getting a lot of money. And you know that a lot of the grifters, I call them, are chomping at the bit in terms of, oh, let me get a contract. Oh, let me come in for more social emotional trauma infused workshops, equity this, equity that. And I want to know how that is going to improve the actual academics and reasons why our students are in school. There's got to be more accountability. And I really see very few elected officials holding our agencies up to account to say, what are you doing with the money and what are the results? And I don't want to hear that spin because I think there's a lot of it. And because of the federal money, we're going to be seeing a lot more of that this year.
Great. I think we just a few minutes left. So I sort of want to end on a positive note because I think that for many parents, this can be sort of constantly frustrating and feel like an uphill battle, just sort of a constant war in which they're alone. So I want to ask each of you to sort of give me one takeaway. What is the biggest success that you've seen in this ongoing struggle? Where have you most felt like victory was closest? I guess I'll start with let me start with Asra, and we'll go from there.
Well, early on, I had a conversation with a colleague and a parent of Yatins in New York, and a father by the name of Chan. And he said to our group here in Fairfax County, be unapologetic, in your arguments and in your advocacy. And when we began in June 2020, we began with 5 parents who had never spoken at school board meetings, 5 parents who respected the authority of the principal and the school board members. And that has increased now to where we have 500 engaged parents in our county. We have 5,000 and counting that sign our petitions. And now we've become a national movement. This whole phenomena that people are seeing right now of Yatin and Nikki and myself speaking, this has emerged out of just this very organic outrage that we have had as individual parents. And we have now a counter movement to this indoctrination that's happening nationwide. And so I want people to feel encouraged by that you're not alone and that we are working together and we're working in all of these school districts to really save America from this phenomenal, toxic, outrageous ideology. And we're really working to save the soul of America and save the soul of our future children. And we will win. We will win because we are on the correct side of history.
Yatin, do you want to?
Yeah, I want to echo so much of what Azra said. I think I see the fact that there are new organizations being formed this year. Last year with Place NYC, very local, and now being connected to parents nationwide through social media and through nationwide organizations such as Parents Defending Education, as well as FAIR. And I think, I think it's going to grow. We hear things every day. And these are not just, 5 parents, 10 parents. We're talking about thousands of parents across the city. We're talking about tens of thousands of parents that have signed into FAIR and say, I want to be connected. I want to know what to do. When is your next event? So I'm optimistic that we are, part of a new movement of pushing back on this racist obsession and things about our students and our future that is so important. So I'm encouraged.
And Nikki?
Yeah, on our indoctrination map, we have, I think, about 150 right now, just local parent groups that have sprung up just to deal with political indoctrination. Not masks, not school reopenings, not school choice, straight on political indoctrination, which I think is super cool. Some of the victories that some of those parent groups have achieved, there's one outside Chicago, Neutral Neighbors. They passed the first version of the Chicago statement for a school district at the K-12 level in the country. That's awesome. The South Lake School Board sweep earlier this week, also awesome. And then there was a superintendent who left Loudoun County outside Virginia with one of the kind of bad actors in the area. He was transferring to a school, he was interviewing at a school district in Texas. The parents talked to each other and they gave the district down there a heads up. And that's the school district actually passed a ban on critical race theory. And during his interview process, they got up in his face and asked him how he felt about these issues. I mean, people talk to each other. That's cool. So, you know, even though there are days when you look at Google alerts and you think, oh my gosh, we're going to lose. There are little victories. And every time something good like that happens, we have to make a point of communicating it to each other because I don't want people to lose heart. We can win this battle.
Okay, well, thank you so much to our panelists for such an insightful and timely conversation. I just want to briefly encourage if you're a parent out there, you may want to get involved with either or both of their organizations. It's, I think, defendinged.org or fairforall.org, FAIR are the two websites. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, sorry, I get some static. And thank you all of you watching for tuning in to our event this afternoon. Before we close, I would like to invite our public audience to sign up to receive updates from the Manhattan Institute. There should be a link in the chat. On our website, you can also browse the Manhattan Institute's research, and if you're able, please also consider supporting the Institute at the link you see in the chat. The Manhattan Institute is a nonprofit organization, and our work depends on support from people like you. Thanks again.
Thank you all.